Presentation by Josh Artuso and Jim Montgomery on property maintenance and code compliance issues in the town of Webster. So I'll hand the time to Josh and Jim.
Thanks, Supervisor. So for those of you that may not have met Jim yet, this is Jim Montgomery, our new code compliance coordinator. He comes with 5 years of experience in municipal building and code compliance. He started back in September, as Supervisor Flaherty mentioned. And the board may recall back in May when we changed some of the shed and fence setback regulations. Part of that presentation had several other topics that we were hoping to address, and we're happy to finally be back here tonight to be tackling the first one of those, which is property maintenance and code compliance. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and we'll go through the presentation.
Thank you, John. I like the segue, Mr. Supervisor. We are going to be talking about grass, but not that kind of grass.
Thank you.
He comes with a sense of humor. I love the guy.
You're going to fit in well here, Jim.
I hope so. So tonight, I want to thank you guys for allowing us to give this presentation tonight. We are going to be talking about property maintenance as it relates to code compliance. And firstly, I do want to say that I have been working, I did work for another municipality for 5 years enforcing New York State property maintenance codes, New York State building codes, and also getting other municipal codes added to town code. So this isn't my first go around with that either. So to start, we are going to be talking about yard maintenance and the yard maintenance complaints that the town has gotten in 2022. I mean tall grass, overgrown weeds, overgrown plantings, and hazardous vegetation. You'll see on the slide there that we received 44 complaints, and 14 of those complaints were actual violations. But it's also important to note that these are the log complaints in our IPS system. Our IPS system is our case management system. And before I started my job here in Webster, the complaints coming in were handled by a number of different staff members. So not everything was logged into IPS. So I can assure you that number is actually very larger than 44. Our current town code defines yard maintenance as to cut, trim, or remove brush, grass, rubbish, and weeds, or to spray with herbicides, cut, trim, remove, or destroy poisonous shrubs or weeds upon lands on a regular basis as to prevent excessive growth, maintain safe conditions and uniform appearance. Established lawns areas must be cut and maintained on a regular basis so that ground cover does not exceed 8 inches in height. Now this is a great definition of yard maintenance. The issue is it's not used in any ordinance in our town code. A resident cannot be in violation of the definition. The definition needs to be used in an ordinance. So right now I have no ability to tell someone that they need to cut their grass if they are indeed in violation of New York State code, which mimics this. And we'll get into that in just a minute. The next piece I wanted to talk about was what I'm going to be calling junk. In our town code, we currently have a number of definitions for things that are like junk or refuse. They are bulk refuse, construction, demolition debris, garbage, rubbish, hazardous waste, household hazardous waste, large appliances, refuse, rubbish, solid waste, yard waste, and wood waste. What you'll see on this slide is there are two of those definitions are highlighted in green, and the rest are in red. The ones in green are used in accordance in our code as it pertains to storage on private property. Those in red are not. So they are just definitions that are not used. So it's great that we have them, but they're not doing anything. These are the 3 sections that I just referred to that refuse and bulk refuse are used in as it relates to storage on private property. 186.18, deposit of public or private property. 225.66, outdoor storage, and that's important to note that that's for commercial districts within the zoning code. And then 186.17, accumulation, burning, burial, and exceptions. So those are those 3 statutes. And that's the limited power that we currently have to enforce any kind of refuse ordinance. This next slide shows a couple examples of refuse or rubbish or junk, but also in those pictures, as you can see, they are a blight to neighbors in the surrounding areas or anybody driving by. But a lot of the items there don't fall into any definition for them, and I don't have any enforcement powers. So although you might not like looking at it, you're stuck with it. So how do we fix this problem, and where do we begin? Well, to start, in and around the year 2020, New York State adopted or kind of partnered with the ICC code, the International Code Council code. Before that, the ICC code was an international code that some states chose to adopt and some states did not. So municipalities would get on the bandwagon or they wouldn't. But in 2020, New York State adopted these codes, and I've included 3 code sections from the New York State Property Maintenance Code. One of which that's very important is the second one you see is New York Section 103.1 Administration and Enforcement. It says the uniform code shall be administered and enforced by the authority having jurisdiction. We are the authority having jurisdiction. The uniform code is part of the uniform code is the property maintenance code. This next slide shows Monroe County and some of the area municipalities outside of Monroe County that have begun to adopt the New York State Uniform Code, including the Property Maintenance Code. The darker the green you see, the more adoption and the more implemented it's become, and the lighter green, there's little to no adoption. As you can see, Webster is lacking in this area. Actually, the only spot that the uniform code is brought up is in the fire prevention code. So Josh and I, we came up with some recommendations for the town board tonight for you to consider. The first being to incorporate the New York State Uniform Code into the current zoning code. So the new chapter 350 zoning would have a section or an ordinance that's standard of adoption. And that would read, the town board of the town of Webster does hereby adopt the provisions of the New York State Uniform Fire Prevention, Building Code, and Property Maintenance Codes of the New York State, and makes them applicable to the town of Webster. And this verbiage would allow us to enforce the New York State Property Maintenance Code as needed within our existing zoning code. I know that I'm speaking fast, but I do have a lot to get through, so I apologize. The zoning code, a lot of it is what I already enforce. So to add extra teeth to it is going to allow us to do more within the property maintenance of commercial properties, of residential properties. In addition to that, our second recommendation would be to create a property maintenance chapter. This chapter would be called property maintenance, and in that we would have to again have a standards of adoption, reading essentially the same thing the town board of the town of Webster does hereby adopt the provisions of the New York State Uniform Fire Prevention, Building Code, and Property Maintenance Codes of New York State and makes them applicable to the town of Webster. We're not reinventing the wheel here. This is what other municipalities have done. Recommendation number 3 would be adding a yard maintenance ordinance instead of just a definition. So we would create a dedicated chapter, obviously covering property maintenance, including the definitions, regulations, administration, enforcement, processes, and procedures. We would include a section that reads something like, heavy undergrowth and accumulation of plant growth which are noxious or detrimental to the health and safety shall be eliminated as required by the New York State Uniform Prevention and Building Code. Except for farms, grass, weeds, trees, and other plant growth shall be cut or trimmed to avoid the development of places for accumulation of blowing trash, dumping, road harborage, infestation, and criminal activity, or places which constitute blight or unsettling influence to the neighborhood. And grass and weeds shall not exceed 10 inches in height. It's important to note, though, we would also need to add an additional provision that provides code enforcement official, myself, to initiate remedial action in cases of non-compliance after due process. So that's a lot of vomit that I just threw at you. What that essentially means is if you don't come into compliance in the time that I provide, I can issue a work order if you're neglecting to come into compliance. Our fourth recommendation would be an outdoor storage ordinance. This is more of an umbrella ordinance so that we can attack certain things that are blight to the neighborhood. So again, we would create that property maintenance chapter, and within it would be this ordinance for outdoor storage of junk. So the outdoor storage or maintenance of junk shall be permitted, or shall not be permitted, excuse me, on any lot or in any district. And inside this, we would also have a definition of junk, and I would say, as used in this section, the term junk, again, this is a hot topic item, believe it or not, shall mean any manufactured good, appliance, fixture, furniture, machinery, motor vehicle, recreational vehicle, trailer, or similar object which is abandoned, demolished, discarded, dismantled, or so worn, deteriorated, or in such a condition that it is not generally usable in its existing state. And in layman's terms, this essentially means it's not readily usable for its intended purpose. And then also we would have to add an additional provision that would authorize the code official and myself to issue a work order if the homeowner was reluctant or refused to come into compliance. So Josh and I, we discussed what we believe the next steps would be. Ultimately, it would be up to the board to draft ordinances in public review and comment, schedule public hearings for future town board meetings, and then adopt and implement new regulations.
Jim, I gotta tell you, that was, you got it done in 11 minutes, and there's a lot there.
I can talk fast.
Yeah, that's, well, and, you know, I will say that that presentation, if it isn't already up on our town website or social media platforms, it will be, for citizens to see, especially if we do proceed on with, you know, the next steps, you know, whether that's in the next week or if it's in the next 6 months. It's a very good foundation for people to look at from the standpoint of what the problems have been.
Absolutely.
And potential ways to.
It's also important to know that all the photos that are on the presentation are homes within Webster.
That was my next question.
Yep,
Yeah.
that was my first question. Didn't
Well, it was mine too, but I was saving it for the question segment.
It is?
Hey, you know, when we put this together, Bill, we wondered if there was a privacy issue, but we don't have any addresses or anything like that, so we. Well, I know, let's not name names, but yeah, believe it or not, that presentation, and I know you guys showed it to me as we were tinkering and trying to get it down to a 10-minute presentation so we could execute it. Yeah, all those pictures are properties and are great on Webster.
So I think your presentation's outstanding and sorely needed with respect to enforcement and definitions being spelled out. And speaking to myself, I hope we can move to the next step. My question and concern is issuing a work order, not so much for an abandoned property, but if someone is living in the property and, you know, one man's junk is another man's treasure, sort of thing, right? And would we have to go to court and have a court order before we issue a work order?
So, Councilman, that's actually a great question, and a lot of this comes down to a judgment call. So if it was an occupied home, in my training experience, I would issue a work order with that.
Okay.
I would forward that case to court.
Right.
Because as you said, one man's junk is another man's treasure. I'm not going to rob that man for his treasure. I'm going to discuss it with him at a later date in court.
Okay, thanks. That was my concern.
Sure.
That's a great answer. I appreciate that.
And this is not a property maintenance question, we might be going down a rabbit hole with this, but we get a lot of complaints. Is parking in a front lawn off of the driveway just in the grass permitted in this town, or is that not in our code yet?
It is not in our code right now.
Because I believe it is.
It is in those, yes, you're correct. It's something you may want to consider.
Exactly.
And this opens the door to going down that road.
Right.
Well, as long as Jim used the word, you know, open the door, you know, I'm not to be a buzzkill, but I also appreciate, you know, property rights, or, you know, we gotta be careful not to move toward homeowner association-esque,
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
you know.
She's trying to treat me well.
You know? But, talking out of both sides of the mouth, I'm sure, at least in the almost 3 years I've been supervisor, this presentation, we get a lot of these calls from irate neighbors. And I'm not, you know, I've said to these people, I'll sometimes drive by to see what they're talking about, because, you know, it's a visual thing. They're trying to explain to me in an email. And when I get back to the neighbor or the, you know, whatever that's complaining, I said, look, to be honest with you, maybe I'm just getting old, I wouldn't want that next to me. I wouldn't want that across the street from my house. But we don't, there are certain situations that we don't have any power to do anything. It's a one man's junk, is another man's castle. So, and Patty, I saw you just, maybe that's what we're trying to see if we can do something.
It is, but I think we also have to realize that when you look at some of these pictures, some of these things are so egregious that it really is an infringement on the neighborhood and the people who live near this.
I agree. I agree. It's funny, and didn't you say, Jim, I mean, you hit the ground running a couple months ago, and within your due diligence of just kind of looking at stuff, didn't you meet with our town judges and kind of get their feel that
I did.
their hands are tied to certain things?
Yes, actually, I'm glad you brought that up, Supervisor. I neglected to mention that I did meet with one of the judges, and cases like this have been brought to him, to his court before, and because the town has not adopted the New York State Property Maintenance Code, he feels that the constituent doesn't really know that they're in violation of something. So until we do that, I can't even bring it to court. So
Because you
until,
can't be in violation of the definition.
well, as far as yard maintenance goes, yes, but you can't be in violation of something you're unaware of either. I mean, if the constituent can't look it up, the judge has a hard time finding them guilty of that.
Let me ask you something else. What's the penalty?
For which, actually, the town decides that.
Oh, okay. What, well, in your prior jurisdiction,
For which?
for violation of the property code in New York State.
It would be a fine
How
of
much?
$1 amount. It could be up to
The dollar amount
$1,000.
makes a difference.
So, sure, I
Because
could type it.
it could, if it rises to the level of misdemeanor
Sure.
type, then the person is entitled to a jury trial.
Councilman, that's far above my grade my pay grade to decide. what
No,
the-
that's what I'm wondering what the experience was,
Yeah.
how they handle it. That there's a lot here, there's an awful lot.
Sure.
This has been brought up in the whole time I've
Yeah,
been town attorney, and there's a lot of reasons why, it's a great idea, again, it's a great idea the state puts these things into effect, but there's no real means of enforcing.
okay. So, in my experience, I believe I've seen fines of up to $1,000 a day. Now,
Correct.
having said that, we would have recommendations to the judge. I can't tell you a single time that I made a recommendation to the judge for a $1,000 fine.
But if it's on the books for $1,000, they're automatically would be entitled, for something like that, they'd be entitled to a jury trial. I'm just telling you.
Oh, right, yeah, sure.
And you, or whoever is writing up the complaint, you have to, I'm sure the judge already told you this, you have to be very specific as to what section is being violated, how, and you have to treat this like it was a criminal matter.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, the good news is I used to be in law enforcement, so I'm used to doing
Okay,
that.
so you're familiar with doing it. Well, but you're not gonna be the only one doing this, right? I mean, eventually,
Well, hopefully there's a
somebody else,
training experience that people, the next person comes in with.
there'll be other people that'll be doing it.
Yeah.
Jim, let me ask this question with respect to what Charlie's bringing up. When you change the code or add to the code, do you identify, where you used to, or did they identify what the first violation cost would be?
In the code section,
Yeah.
it would be in the penalty section of that chapter.
Right, and it would spell it out, okay,
Yes.
violation, this first violation is X amount of dollars, second is X amount of dollars, so
Right.
it's not up to your discretion, it's already spelled out, right?
Up to this, yes, but it's, in my experience, I've never gone for a max fine.
That's why I said it's up to,
Yes,
correct?
yes, sir.
And,
I just wanted some clarification, thanks.
and Jim, I know this is, I think, your first time, actually, Charlie's the town attorney, not councilman, but that,
Sorry.
I'm glad, no, if you think about it, what was proposed here tonight was kind of the skeleton of putting it together. I appreciate that you didn't make any proposals of fines and penalties, because really that needs more discussion. You know, as we go through those next steps, I don't want to rush this along to adopt if we don't have some good conversation.
Sure.
You know, there's got to be something that is not just a feel-good for today, but something we look at each other and say, you know, based on this town now, the socioeconomic makeup of it, the 22,000 square foot lots, that we built all these houses on over the last 30 years. It's not a farm town with, everybody's got 5 acres. What makes sense foreseeable next 20 years, you know? And I would imagine that the setting the per incident fees and penalties, that is part of the town board's charge on this, no pun intended. And Charlie, we would need to know,
No, there's-
are we operating in a
there's-
vacuum? And you're like, yeah, you don't want to set that at that amount,
There's
because
a
you've
lot
got
of-
a jury trial.
There's a lot, well, no,
Yeah.
I'm just bringing these things up because this is, it's not a, I appreciate the work that Jim and Josh are doing this. The problem is the whole concept of a maintenance code, a property maintenance code. There's a lot of issues, okay? There's constitutional issues, there are legal issues, there's administrative issues, and I mean, it requires more than a 15-minute conversation, obviously.
No doubt.
But we would have to have
No
some
doubt.
real heavy discussions as to how it's going to work. I have a concern because probably, first of all, New York is probably, I can tell you, being you've been a lawyer for 5 decades now, almost, we're probably one of the most highly regulated, if not the most highly regulated state in the country. We have more laws and more regulations. I mean, probably every one of us here is in violation of 10 or 15 a day, or anyway. But the bottom line is that we would, in order to enforce this, you have to assume that every single citizen is aware of what is in the code. And that's problematic. I mean, so,
Isn't that the case with any code?
yes, it is. It
And I
is.
think-
You're just adding, what's happening is you're adding more onto it, and it's on somebody's personal property. It's a little bit different than something where you're punching somebody in the nose, okay?
I understand, but I think
Yeah.
in the past, excuse me, I think in the past, we have not addressed this, we haven't looked at it, we haven't gone beyond the 15-minute conversation because of all these concerns. That being said, my time on the town board, the two things that I hear all the time when I'm talking to citizens or when I'm out in the neighborhoods is speed and the appearance of some of these abandoned or neglected properties. And I think that it deserves that extra conversation in an effort to really take a deep dive, look at it, and see what we can do.
I just want to add that, you know, to Charlie's statement regarding, you know, you have to assume that all the residents are aware, which clearly they wouldn't be. So I go back to Jim regarding process. So you get a complaint about a property that has junk all over the place, right? What we define as junk. Well, your first step in the process would be,
Thank you, actually, thank you for bringing that up. The first step in the process would be educating the constituent by sending out a notice saying, this is our ordinance, you're in violation of it, you have this much time to correct it. So they would be made aware of the violation.
Just to clarify too, you are not, unless the homeowner admits you, you're not entitled or permitted to go on the property.
Oh, no, I would never violate a Fourth Amendment, or,
So-
sorry.
Yeah,
No,
so,
no,
so
sorry, no.
what you would do is that, as you did with these, is take a picture from a public area, from the
Yes.
street, or a neighbor would take a picture and then give it to you and
Or
say,
the
well,
neighbor, yeah, or the neighbor would give me permission to enter.
to their side,
Yes.
their property, yeah,
Yes.
okay. And that's the way it would be done. That's the way it would be, well, started.
Well, and that's the way any of the codes that we can enforce are handled.
And, you know,
Yeah.
and Jim's only been here for a couple of months, but hit the ground running, and we get these calls to the supervisor's office, so then I immediately, you know, there's two sides to every story. The person calls into me and Kim in my office and says, you know, yeah, you can't believe this, you know, the sky is red in this issue. I go to Jim and say, can you tell me, it ends up, his side of the story is the sky is blue, and given some framework to that, Jim at least is handling it. You get more with honey than you get with vinegar. You're giving them the notice, you're not going out of the property. They call, this and that. You worked with some of these people to say, listen, I realize your yard, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, you have so much there. And there are hoarders out there, let's just call it what it is. Asking you to finish that up by our, in 30 days is almost untenable. So you've set ways where they can make chunks of it and show that they're working with us. And if they work with you and do that, we're not trying to hammer these people, we're trying to work with them. And it's funny, these situations tend to manifest themselves early on. Is the person, they were just ignorant of the law, and now they're made aware of the law, they're making efforts to remedy, or they basically given us a big, whatever. And that's where I think, if they're giving us the big, what, we need to have something that we can lean back on via code, via work orders, via civil penalties or whatever they are. Because, and I go back to what you said, Penny, so 20 people that live around that house have to look at that. I get it, it's subjective. One man's garbage is another man's, castle, but I don't know. The ones that I've been called on the last 3 years, and I go and look, and like I said, maybe I'm just an old fuddy-duddy now, and I'm like, yeah, no, that doesn't, I wouldn't want to live next to that.
Well, the problem, again, I have a lot of problems with the concept, and this is nothing personal than I just did, but, I'm looking at this, and it's always been in the executive law, there's been references made by the executive law of the state of New York. And that's what former Governor Cuomo signed into law back in 2020. But he put this uniform code in and said basically that every person down in the state is subject to it, and every municipality has the authority and shall administer and enforce it. Okay? Well, how does the average person know what's in that code? I mean, probably every one of us here could be in violation of the code, right? In some ways or other.
Right.
I mean, that's a problem when they pass laws like this, and they say, okay, we're gonna take this whole gigantic, and the code is pretty big, isn't it?
It is, but
I mean,
it's
it's
bare
like
minimum.
this, it's inches thick.
No, the property maintenance code is actually probably 30 to 40 pages long.
Okay.
And it's bare minimum. And the other thing is that these municipalities that adopt this, they're not just saying we adopt this, that's it. They're putting the sections into the town code. So they do have the ability.
Well, that would be the smart thing to do. Yeah, I agree. If you're gonna do it, put it in the code, so the people who live there. But I'm just looking at the sections that you quoted. It says such city, town, etc., shall administer and enforce. So, anyway, it's something we can discuss, obviously. But I'd be very interested, we don't have to talk about it now, to find out or to know what your prior jurisdiction did, how they handled these complaints.
Yeah, I'd love to have that conversation.
Well, unless any other questions or comments from the board, once again, we go past the 15 minutes if there's robust Q&A, which is good. I said last week when we adopted the resolution to clean up the codes, the Barbat and Scott project that she's been handling for the last 2+ years, I said that was phase 1. Now that we're done with phase 1, we will start looking at phase 2, which is, and this is one of them, taking a look at where do we need to add codes or whatever. So it's funny, I'm already working with Kim in my office to have the workshop of January 26th. I know that's 2.5 months away. The whole theme of that workshop presentation will be these potential phase 2 in this process type of things. Maybe we'll have you back on the 26th of January with some, some other things within this, now that you've heard, the board take on this.
That'd be great.
But thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Thanks, Art.